Everyone thought they knew Denzel Washington, the calm, composed icon of American cinema. But one live interview changed everything. On what was supposed to be a light-hearted night on Jimmy Kimmel's show, something snapped. A single off-handed joke triggered years of buried pain. What the audience saw was shocking, but what happened behind the scenes? That's where the truth lives. What could make a man known for his dignity lose it on national TV? The night began with bright lights, polished smiles, and the kind of charged atmosphere only late-night television can deliver. Jimmy Kimmel, seated behind his iconic desk, welcomed the crowd as the camera panned to tonight's highly anticipated guest, Denzel Washington. Applause erupted. Phones came out. Some stood in ovation before Denzel even stepped on stage. The nation adored him. For decades, he represented something rare: excellence without scandal, success without arrogance, fame without compromise. That night, though, as he strolled across the stage in a charcoal suit, his eyes held a weight no applause could lift. Kimmel greeted him with a grin, but when their hands met in a handshake, the smile on Denzel's face flickered. It wasn't obvious. Not enough to raise alarms. Just enough to feel strange if you were paying attention. Kimmel started light, complimenting Denzel's recent film and joking about his ageless appearance. The audience laughed on cue. Denzel nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. Something was brewing, just beneath the surface. Kimmel then asked about the actor's intense roles and how he gets into character. Denzel gave a careful answer, citing discipline and faith, but paused unusually long between his words. Viewers at home likely didn't catch it, but the live audience shifted in their seats. They could feel it. Something was off. Then came the turning point of the segment. Kimmel, in his signature style of teasing, said, "You're always so serious, man. Don't tell me you've never snapped at someone. What does angry Denzel look like?" The question was said with a smile. But Denzel didn't smile back. The air grew tense. "Be careful what you ask for, Jimmy," Denzel said, voice low and still. The crowd chuckled awkwardly. Kimmel tried to keep the vibe light by playing a pre-recorded skit parodying Denzel's dramatic roles, featuring an impersonator yelling at fictional interns in mock-serious rage. The audience laughed, unsure if Denzel was laughing too. He wasn't. His jaw tightened. His hand flexed subtly on the armrest of the guest chair. He leaned forward slightly, like a man deciding whether to speak or let it go. But he didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he nodded slowly, the smile frozen on his face like a mask beginning to crack. The segment ended, and Kimmel tossed to commercial. The screen faded to black, but in that final half-second, a close-up caught something haunting. Denzel whispering to himself, "They really think this is a joke." Denzel Washington didn't grow up in luxury or under the glow of Hollywood lights. He came from a modest home in Mount Vernon, New York, raised by a Pentecostal minister father and a beauty salon owner mother who believed in discipline, God, and hard work. Respect wasn't handed to him, it had to be earned. From an early age, Denzel knew silence was power. His father taught him that the loudest man in the room often had the least to say. That lesson stuck. He learned to listen more than he spoke, to carry pain like armor, and to smile through the weight of expectations. Even when his family life started to crack in places no one saw, he never allowed the outside world to witness it. His parents separated when he was 14, and that fracture in his foundation never fully healed. But he pressed forward. He carried his family name with pride, always aware that any wrong move would stain more than just his reputation. It would stain everything his parents had sacrificed for. In Hollywood, where fame often demands a price, Denzel became the exception. He refused roles that degraded his values. He turned down scripts that mocked his culture. He avoided scandals, ignored tabloids, and kept his personal life locked behind an unbreakable wall. To most, it looked like he had mastered the art of balance. But balance can be exhausting. His success wasn't effortless. It was heavy, and with every year, the crown he wore pressed harder on his shoulders. As an actor, he was celebrated. As a man, he was scrutinized. His words were dissected, his silences misread, and his dignity constantly tested. Still, he kept showing up. Kept giving. Kept pretending it didn't get to him. Few people knew about the rift between Denzel and his oldest son, Malcolm. It wasn't public. It wasn't on Instagram. But it was deep. A single argument years ago, about legacy and freedom, had widened into years of silence. Malcolm wanted to make his own path, outside of his father's shadow. But Denzel feared letting go. That fear turned into control. Control turned into distance. And distance became silence. It wasn't that Denzel didn't love his son. He loved him so much that it scared him. But love mixed with fear often looks like anger. And when Jimmy Kimmel made that joke on live television, referencing a tabloid rumor that Malcolm had once walked out of a red carpet event to avoid standing next to his father, it hit a nerve Denzel had kept buried under years of discipline. The public never saw the letters he wrote but never sent. They didn't see the way he'd pause interviews when a question touched too close to home. They didn't hear his voice crack when he talked about family in private speeches no one ever recorded. To the world, Denzel was composed. But inside, the pain sat like lead. So when he sat on that late-night couch, trying to hold himself together, he wasn't just reacting to a joke. He was fighting memories. Fighting guilt. Fighting years of pretending that being a strong man meant being quiet about your wounds. And even though the audience didn't know the story behind his eyes, the weight he carried was screaming to be let out. All it took was one careless joke to slice the wound open. The crowd clapped as the cameras came back from commercial. The music swelled, the lights warmed, and Jimmy Kimmel leaned in toward Denzel with that trademark grin. At first, it seemed like the tension had passed. The earlier awkward moment, where Denzel's smile faltered and his tone turned sharp, appeared forgotten. But behind that grin, Jimmy was planning his next punchline. He was no stranger to stirring the pot. That was his brand: poke the bear, push the edge, land the laugh. He figured Denzel would roll with it. He always did. Always the class act. Always the composed giant. So when Jimmy pulled out a crumpled card from his jacket and said, "You know, I read something interesting. Apparently, your son once said he didn't want to live in his dad's shadow. Left an award show to prove it. Any truth to that?" The laughter from the audience came too quickly. It was the kind of laughter that covers nervousness. No one expected that line. No one knew how far Jimmy was about to go. Denzel didn't laugh. He blinked once, then again. His hands, which had been calmly resting on the armrests, clenched into fists. His posture stiffened. There was a silence that lasted just a few seconds but felt like hours. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. Jimmy, sensing the shift but unsure how to pull back, tried to make it sound light. "I mean, come on, we've all had kids say stuff like that. Mine said I wasn't funny last week." He chuckled. But it only made things worse. Denzel slowly turned his head, locking eyes with Jimmy in a way that drained every ounce of humor from the room. The smile left Jimmy's face. The crowd stopped clapping. The music had long faded, and now the room was so quiet you could hear someone cough in the back row. "You know what's funny, Jimmy?" Denzel's voice was calm but heavy. "It's always the people with the biggest platforms who think they're entitled to the smallest pieces of a man's soul." Jimmy looked confused, maybe even a little scared, but Denzel wasn't done. "You don't know what my son and I have been through. You don't know what that moment meant to me. And you don't have the right to make it entertainment." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut like a blade. The crew behind the cameras began shifting nervously. A producer whispered to someone wearing a headset. But Kimmel was stuck. He tried to redirect, saying, "Hey, we're just having fun, man. Don't take it so serious." That was the worst thing he could have said. Denzel sat back in his chair, took a slow breath, and looked out at the crowd. "This is what happens, isn't it?" he said, almost to himself. "You spend your whole life trying to keep your family out of the circus, and then one clown decides to drag them in anyway." The audience didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent. Some gave a few awkward chuckles, unsure of the tone. The stage manager waved a frantic signal to cut to commercial again, but the moment had already been broadcast. Millions were watching. Social media was already exploding. Phones lit up in the crowd as people started tweeting what they'd just seen. On screen, Kimmel was trying to salvage the segment. "All right, folks, we'll be right back after this break." His voice cracked just slightly. As the camera lights dimmed and the screen faded, Denzel didn't move. He just sat there, his eyes fixed forward, his breathing calm but tight. The mask had cracked. The pressure that had built up for years was now leaking through. And for the first time in his long career, he wasn't acting. He wasn't playing a role. He was just a man, hurt, angry, and done pretending. Behind the scenes, assistants scrambled, stagehands whispered, and producers debated what to do next. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The world had just witnessed something rare and raw, a legend showing pain in real time, live on air, with nowhere to hide. As the show returned from commercial, everything looked normal on the surface. The lights came back up, the music played like clockwork, and Jimmy Kimmel sat smiling like nothing had happened. But something had changed. The energy in the room was off. The air felt heavier, like everyone was waiting for something else to happen. Denzel was still in his seat, but now he sat a little straighter, a little stiffer. His face had lost all its warmth. He wasn't playing along anymore. He didn't laugh at the next question. He didn't smirk at the next joke. Instead, he responded with short, clipped answers, and every so often, he would glance toward the crowd, not to engage them, but as if he were trying to figure out if they were laughing with him or at him. Jimmy tried to recover the mood with some quick humor. He joked about Denzel's intense roles, saying maybe he brought some of that anger from training day to the set tonight. The audience gave a weak laugh, sensing it was safe to react again. But Denzel tilted his head and said, "I didn't bring anything, Jimmy. You opened the door." That line froze the room again. You could see it on Jimmy's face. He knew he had lost control. And for the first time on his own show, he looked unsure. He leaned forward, trying to smooth things over. "Come on, man. We've known each other for years. You know I've got nothing but love for you." Denzel gave a slow nod, then said something that hit even harder than his earlier words. "Funny how love sounds a lot like disrespect when you're not the one being laughed at." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Denzel wasn't yelling. He wasn't acting out. He was calm, but sharp. Each word was like a quiet cut, and it became clear he wasn't just talking to Jimmy anymore. He was talking to the room, to the cameras, to the culture. "We live in a time," he said slowly, "where a man's deepest pain becomes a setup for a laugh. Where the silence he's held for decades gets turned into ratings. And we call it entertainment." No one dared interrupt him. He continued, "You think it's just a joke. But I've spent my whole life swallowing what I wanted to say just to stay safe. Just to stay palatable. And now you want me to smile while you poke at the very thing I protect most. My family." People in the crowd looked at one another, unsure if they were supposed to clap or stay quiet. The studio crew watched nervously, hands hovering over buttons, unsure if they should cut away or let him speak. Kimmel glanced toward the producers, his face pale. But Denzel wasn't done. He turned to the audience. "This isn't just about me. This is about every man told to smile through it. Every black father whose love gets turned into a punchline. Every moment of dignity twisted into something small." The words rang through the room. Some clapped now, not the full crowd, just a few, but it was enough. Enough to show they understood what was really happening. This wasn't just a guest gone off script. This was a man reaching a breaking point after years of biting his tongue. Kimmel, clearly nervous, tried to wrap the segment early. He shifted in his seat, thanking Denzel for coming on and suggesting they move to a fun game segment. But Denzel stayed seated, unmoving. "We're not done," he said. His voice was steady, and he didn't raise it. But the authority in it left no room for argument. "You asked me what angry Denzel looks like, Jimmy. This is it. It doesn't look like fists. It doesn't look like shouting. It looks like truth you didn't expect to hear on your show." Silence again. Even the band in the corner, always ready to play off a tense moment, sat still. Somewhere in that moment, the audience stopped seeing him as an actor. They saw the father, the husband, the man. And maybe, for the first time, they realized how much pressure had been sitting on his back all these years. He wasn't lashing out for attention. He wasn't trying to go viral. He was defending something sacred. And whether they agreed with him or not, no one could deny the honesty of what they were seeing. The cameras stayed on him for a second too long. Long enough to catch the faint glisten in his eyes before he looked away. He wasn't broken. But something inside him had shifted forever. When the segment ended, the network quickly switched to a pre-recorded musical performance, cutting away from the set while the cameras were still adjusting their angles. At home, viewers assumed the tension had passed. Denzel would walk off, shake Jimmy's hand, maybe offer a quick nod, and the whole thing would be chalked up to an intense moment of miscommunication. But that's not what happened. What the public didn't see was far more explosive than anything that aired. A low-quality backstage video, likely filmed by a crew member or staff assistant with a phone tucked behind a clipboard, surfaced just hours later. It began with Denzel stepping behind the curtain, followed closely by two producers trying to smooth things over. Their voices were low, but urgent. One said, "We didn't mean any disrespect, Denzel." The other added, "It was meant to be light, just playing off a headline." Denzel stopped, turned around slowly, and stared at them. What came next wasn't yelling, it was worse. It was cold, exact, and devastating. "You used my pain to fill a time slot," he said, voice steady. "You sat in a room, rehearsed that question, and still decided it was worth the risk. You knew. Don't act like you didn't." The producers glanced at each other, unsure of how to respond. They tried to backpedal, but Denzel cut through them with a single line, "You don't know me. Don't ever pretend that you do." Then Jimmy appeared. He walked backstage with a nervous half-smile, the kind you give when you want to pretend everything's fine. "Denzel," he said, "listen, man. I didn't mean anything by it. I thought we were cool. We joke. That's what we do. It's the show." Denzel didn't move. He didn't blink. "This isn't a show to me," he said. "This is my life. This is my son. And you don't get to laugh at that. Not ever." Jimmy tried to laugh it off, clapping Denzel lightly on the arm. But Denzel didn't move. His eyes locked onto Jimmy's. "You wouldn't last one day living under the weight I carry. So don't come to me with your jokes." Jimmy stepped back, looking around for someone, anyone, to pull him out of the moment. Security started moving toward the hallway as tension in the room thickened. It was clear things were spiraling. A senior producer stepped in, whispering something into his earpiece, then gestured to the security staff to stand down. But Denzel had already seen enough. He shook his head, not in anger, but in deep disappointment. "You had a chance to honor something real," he said, "but you chose to entertain instead. That says more about you than it ever will about me." The video clip ended there, but the internet didn't stop. Within an hour, it was all over Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube. Different versions of the clip popped up. Some focused on Denzel's words. Others focused on Kimmel's stunned silence. Hashtags exploded, #respect Denzel, #Kimmel crossed the line, #protect our legends. The divide was instant. Some defended Kimmel, saying comedians push boundaries. Others said he'd gone too far, targeting a man's pain for a cheap laugh. But what nearly everyone agreed on was this: they'd never seen Denzel like that. Raw. Exposed. Unfiltered. And most of all, human. It wasn't rage. It was heartbreak wrapped in control. It was the kind of emotional honesty that couldn't be rehearsed. Some industry insiders began speaking out. One late-night writer tweeted, "We've all known how tightly Denzel guards his personal life. That moment wasn't scripted. It was personal. It was real." Another actor posted a video saying, "I've worked with Denzel. He's the most disciplined man I've ever met. If he broke, it's because something sacred got touched." Meanwhile, late-night hosts on rival shows began subtly referencing the event, some with support, others with veiled jokes. The media couldn't get enough. Headlines exploded: Denzel Washington's explosive confrontation caught on tape, Kimmel versus Washington, when jokes go too far, and a legend's breaking point live on air. But the loudest voices came from everyday people. Parents. Sons. Artists. People who had held things in for years, just like Denzel. They shared their own stories of pressure, pain, and losing it when they least expected to. It became more than a scandal. It became a reflection. A mirror held up to the public that asked, how often do we mistake control for peace? How often do we celebrate the composed and ignore the cracking underneath? Denzel didn't post anything. He didn't comment. He didn't release a statement. But his silence now spoke louder than ever before. And the world, watching, analyzing, debating, finally understood that something deep had been unleashed. The morning after the broadcast, headlines dominated every screen. News alerts buzzed on phones before the sun was even up. The clip from Jimmy Kimmel's show had gone viral overnight, but it was the leaked backstage footage that sent everything into overdrive. It wasn't just entertainment news anymore. It was everywhere. Morning shows, political podcasts, celebrity gossip pages, mental health forums, and parenting blogs all had something to say. But the one voice missing in all the noise was Denzel's. No tweet. No interview. No apology. No explanation. He didn't show up at the scheduled press junket for his upcoming film. He didn't appear at the charity gala he was supposed to headline. He vanished, no public appearances, no cameras, no press releases. Silence. For a man who built a career on presence, his absence was deafening. The internet did what it always does, it split. Some people defended him fiercely, saying it was about time someone stood up to the fake smiles and forced laughs of late-night television. Others accused him of being too sensitive, claiming that comedians had the right to say anything in the name of humor. But even the critics seemed unsure this time. The look in Denzel's eyes during that interview lingered in the minds of viewers. It wasn't performance. It wasn't a meltdown. It was a man who had been holding something in for far too long. And when it came out, it didn't explode, it revealed. It peeled back decades of calm to show something fragile and real underneath. Jimmy Kimmel issued a statement that felt rushed and thin. It read, "I have deep respect for Denzel Washington and regret if anything I said came off as disrespectful. That was never my intention." The phrasing didn't sit well with many. Words like if and intention made it feel like a legal note, not an apology. People online tore it apart. Celebrities were split, some posted vague tweets about respect and boundaries, others stayed silent, not wanting to choose sides. But the public didn't forget. In the days that followed, hashtags continued to trend. Think pieces filled social media. Why Denzel's silence speaks volumes, the emotional cost of public grace, when legends break character, and Black fatherhood in the spotlight were just a few of the viral titles. Meanwhile, talk show writers began changing scripts. Producers reviewed past interviews to see where the line had been crossed before. What had once been seen as clever now felt cruel. What was once entertainment now looked more like exploitation. People started noticing how many times pain had been used for laughs. It wasn't just Denzel. It was a pattern. A cycle. And now that someone like him had broken it, on air, no less, people couldn't unsee it. Behind the scenes, friends close to Denzel shared that he was fine, just taking time to reflect. He was with family. He was reading, walking, reconnecting. No one dared push him for more. His team refused to comment. His agent stayed silent. Even his publicist offered nothing. It was clear that this moment wasn't for spinning. It was for healing. And maybe, for once, Denzel wasn't worried about what people thought. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. He had said more with his silence than most people say in a press tour. What lingered, though, was what this moment left behind. A shift. Not just in public opinion, but in how people viewed celebrities, talk shows, and the invisible weight that dignity carries. It sparked conversations in homes, offices, and classrooms. About fathers and sons. About boundaries and jokes. About the cost of always being the bigger person. Some began to see Denzel not just as a great actor, but as a man who had spent a lifetime playing the role of strength, only to finally let people see the cost of that performance. The final irony was that the story Kimmel had tried to squeeze a laugh out of, the one about Denzel's son walking away from his shadow, had, in a way, come full circle. Because now the world had seen the shadow for what it truly was. Not darkness, but weight. Not shame, but depth. And it wasn't Denzel who looked small in that moment. It was everyone who thought his silence meant weakness. Days turned into weeks, and while the media moved on to other scandals and stories, something about that night stayed with people. A single moment of honesty, broadcast live, without polish or permission. No follow-up. No damage control. Just one man choosing, finally, not to pretend. And in doing so, he left behind a question that echoed louder than any headline. How many others are quietly carrying the same weight, just waiting for the moment they no longer have to?